Still current UFC welterweight champion Islam Makhachev once again proved last weekend that he does belong in the welterweight division, and yet there are still a lot of MMA talking heads and MMA content creators questioning whether or not he truly does belong in the welterweight division. After successfully defending his belt, after originally winning his belt against JDM not too long ago. And although I do understand why he's still being questioned, he's a bit shorter in comparison to the top few in the division currently. But I do believe he's still around the right height for the division. I think it will take him some time to fully adjust weight-wise, to get enough musculature to be effective. But, the height question, I don't fully believe is necessary. I think the welterweight division is just this really weird go-between area, coincidentally, between middleweight and lightweight, where in lightweight you have, your 5'8", 5'9", 5'7" guys battling each other, the occasional 6 foot plus guy who's extremely skinny, and that's about it. At middleweight, the average is your regular tall guy, your 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", 6'3" guy, and they're not anorexic, they're pretty filled out. Your Dricus du Plessis, Khamzat Chimaev, Sean Strickland, 6 foot plus guys who, are naturally at that right size. And welterweight, in my opinion, is just this weird go-between where you've got extreme variation. Some are tall, pretty skinny guys. Some are shorter, more filled out guys. It's a combination. You got your Sean Brady's who, looked incredibly ripped, but turned out to be incredibly short in comparison to other guys. And then you have your Ian Gary's and Carlos Pratez's, who are 6 foot plus, but again are on the skinny end, but can utilize their range and reach to an extreme advantage. That's why I think it's also, I think that's another part about it that makes that division so fun to watch. Because, you'll have very often these matchups that are just incredible height mismatches, like Sean Brady versus Michael Morales, and pretty much like Islam versus Ian Gary. And what will likely be Islam versus Carlos Prates, So I do think Islam's the right height for the division. It's just that the division is so varied when it comes to height. Right now, the welterweight division just so happens to have, a top 4 or top 5 of mostly tall guys. Ian Gary, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, 4 that come off the top of my head that are 6 foot plus and are extremely effective and talented, And then, like I said, you've got Sean Brady. You have a little bit of more shorter fighters like Sean Brady and Bilal Muhammad. And then you've got mid-range that are like pretty much just borderline 6 foot, like Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman, and I believe JDM. So welterweight is just this, amalgamation of different sizes. And the shorter guys get to fill out really nicely and build that muscle. The taller guys don't really have the advantage of filling out, but they do have the advantage of training to be really, really good at establishing range and utilizing their reach, to be able to snipe their opponents from the outside, to gauge distance, to just be really effective at touching their opponent before their opponent can touch them, given their advantage in reach. So that's why I believe Islam Makhachev, after further thought, really isn't outside of his depth when it comes to trying to be a dominant force at welterweight. He's right where he needs to be. He's no stranger to this division. This division has always had guys like him. I think the only issue is just properly adjusting from that lighter division in lightweight, meaning that Islam, like he's publicly stated, needs to pack on more muscle. He's got to lift more weights and be able to come in much fuller given his shorter stature. And that's going to give him an advantage in power and in the grappling realm, where he's going to be able to manhandle these taller, lankier guys, and he may just be able to outpunch these taller, lankier guys in terms of power. Maybe not Carlos Prates, but, you know, Ian Gary, like he did with the head kick, and maybe Michael Morales and Shavkat, you know. When it comes to Carlos Prates, his power is a bit different. You know, he's got the power combination with the reach, and it's much more, effective than, in my opinion, Michael Morales's or Shavkat's or Ian Gary's. So, yeah, I think Islam Makhachev did make an excellent move in moving to welterweight, and I do think he has a good chance at dominating the welterweight division if he were to never cross paths with Carlos Prates. That's the only thing. I do think Carlos Prates can and will beat Islam, but if Carlos was to never be in that division in the first place, I think Islam Makhachev could and would dominate the welterweight division for years, you know? And he's got, I think, only like maybe 2 or 3 years left before he really needs to consider retirement. Maybe he may age like Yoel Romero. But you know, if he wanted to, he could definitely rule the division for years if Carlos Prates was never in the division. Carlos just poses so much of a problem given his ability to blend power and reach so well. You know, you have other taller fighters like Ian Gary and Michael Morales who just don't really seem to have as much power as Carlos Prates does. Michael Morales is very talented, and I would say that he's equally talented as Carlos Prates in terms of striking. But for Michael Morales, in my opinion, he needs a lot of opportunities to tag his opponents to really knock him out. Carlos Prates needs 1 or 2. Just a strong cross, right on the chin, right on the button, and whoever's in front of him is going to sleep. And I think that's perfect for Islam Makhachev, who is a world-class striker who you cannot afford to really mess up on the feet with. All Carlos needs is 1 solid opening, 1 solid weak spot to throw something heavy at, and that's all she wrote. So that's why I really do believe Carlos Prates is the Islam stopper, despite, you know, the grappling disparity between him and Islam. Where if Islam was able to get his hands on Carlos would be done, would likely be done. But yeah, you know, this is my mainly a response to, you know, Joe Rogan's comments about Islam and how he feels like, you know, Islam should think about moving back down to lightweight. And I think it's out of the question, and it's nonsensical in my opinion. You know, I understand these talking heads talking about how welterweight is just this bigger division, and Islam just isn't biologically fit for it. But I completely disagree. Islam Makhachev is not 5'7", he's not 5'8". I believe he's 5'10", maybe 5'9", and I think he can do damage. You know, I don't think that's too short for the division. I think the cutoff is that 5'9" range. You know, I do think Sean Brady is a bit out of his depth, with all due respect to Sean Brady, because he is 5'7". But also, when you look at Sean Brady, he's had extreme success at welterweight for a long time. So if he can do it, Islam can obviously do it. You know, but like I said, I don't mean to really go too far in on the people saying that Islam's out of his depth, because I did see Islam struggle with the reach of Ian Gary last weekend. You know, I do think Islam still has a lot of adjustment to get through to fully be, you know, comfortable in the welterweight division. But I don't think he's too far off from fully being comfortable. You know, I think just kind of trying to fill out a little bit more, show up to fights with a little bit more muscle definition, and besides that, you know, whatever little tips and tricks he can learn how to do as the shorter fighter fighting a taller fighter. You know, whether he wants to take the bob and weave out of Mike Tyson's book, or any other sort of tip and trick that shorter fighters use to get past the reach of taller fighters. There's a little bit that can be learned there for Islam Makhachev if he hopes to keep fighting, you know, these 6-foot+ demons in that top 4 or 5 at welterweight right now. You know, I think Islam can get past the shorter ones like like I said, Bilal Muhammad, JDM, and Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. But when it does come to those 6 foot plus guys like 6'2", 6'3", when we're talking about Carlos Prates and Ian Gary and Shavkat and Michael Morales, a little bit more needs to be done. Islam just needs to do a little bit more preparing. I do not think Islam is, I do not think Islam doesn't belong in the welterweight division. He belongs, and he's proven that with his last 2 wins. Yes, they're quite controversial in terms of how much he's utilized grappling in them. And like I said, I do think a conversation needs to be had about maybe shifting some rules, having the refs stand fighters up if the grappling exchanges are becoming a little too stale for too long. But in the end, Islam physically dominated 2 top-tier welterweights in a row. I think he's proven he belongs. The only question is, how will he fare against a third welterweight that is now extremely lanky and also extremely powerful, and will definitely pose some distance issues for Islam Makhachev? What creative, ingenious way is Khabib and Islam going to cook up with Team Dagestan to get past the range of Carlos Prates, to get Islam's hands on him, to drag him to the depths of hell? I think it's possible. I think Islam can get past the reach of Carlos Prates and submit him in quick succession. I just think Carlos, he utilizes his range way too well to let it happen. I think if it is to happen, it's going to happen late. And Islam's going to need to survive those first 2 rounds with a really long, powerful monster coming at him. And I just don't see Islam surviving, in my opinion, with all due respect to the guy that very well may become the UFC GOAT if he's able to get past Carlos. But yeah, that's my general response to whether or not Islam Makhachev is a true welterweight, whether or not he belongs, because like I said, a lot of people have been questioning that, despite him just beating Ian Gary last weekend, successfully defending his title as king of the welterweights. Overall, let me know what you think.